This is AHA Business Radio, creating aha moments for business, by business, and about business, providing opportunities to discover information to help you run your business and guide your decision making. The more you know, the better decisions you make. AHA Business Radio is produced by Allan Hirsh Advisors. For more information, log on to ahabusinessradio.com. To join in tonight's conversation, call 410-481-1300. Now, here's your host for AHA Business Radio, Allan Hirsh.
Good night. Welcome to tonight's show. I will be spotlighting for local business owners and the CEO Spotlight Show. My first guest in the studio with me is Lila Hollander, founder and I guess president of Trade River USA. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm glad you could be here. It's my pleasure as well. The first question I ask every guest is, what motivates you to get up in the morning and go to work?
I would have to say two things. One is excitement and adrenaline. And what I'm going to say is excitement because I get to get up in the morning and I understand that the product that we offer to our client base is really something that is transformational. And the adrenaline piece is actually being a startup and everything that entails, and every day tends to be a different day.
So how long have you been in business?
This business here in the United States has been on since 2015 that we've gone live. We beta tested in 2014. So we are a young company, about 2.5 years old at this time. So
what is it that you do so the listening audience has an understanding of what Trade River USA is?
Okay, I probably need to answer that in two parts. So the first part is our definition would be that we are a paperless online platform, specifically providing direct funding and services between buyers and sellers, enabling them to do trade finance and supply chain finance directly on their basis, and we empower them to do so. And the buyer can get funding from us through this platform up to 120 days, and the supplier gets paid 100% at the time that the buyer has accepted the payment obligation from the supplier. Now, having said that, I think I just like to regress and talk a little more about historically how we came about developing this platform.
Well, my next question was, how'd you get started? And why'd you get started? So please, go ahead.
So it's primarily historically, in terms of trade finance, it is an area that has tended to be very documentation heavy. It's been, in terms of the financial institutions have always touched each piece of the supply chain. Means you needed bills of lading, you needed letters of credit, as well as title of the goods. So what you had was constantly these financial institutions basically creating these bottlenecks in terms of the actual trade transaction. And back in early 2000, some associates and I looked at this structure and said, what if we just looked at it completely differently, forget how it's been done for centuries? How can we facilitate this and really become buyer-centric? So we look at the buyer as our client. What could we do to facilitate
So you
this
really
process?
you really set about to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely.
In buyer-seller and transactions.
Absolutely we did. And so what we figured, is there a way that we can remove that third party and disintermediate and have the buyer and seller really be in charge and choose what it is that makes sense for them, because they're the ones who know their product and they understand their service. So it makes sense to get out of the middle. So we decided, how can we do this given how everybody looks at this product at the moment? And so
I just want to interrupt here because I know from my experience in the international publishing business,
yes,
the roadblocks that bankers could do, and probably even worse now with regulation, interference they
true.
put in the
Absolutely.
transaction of doing business. So
Yes.
I'll just leave it at that for anybody that's having been there. So what you're doing sounds very interesting. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but please go ahead.
So what we did is we pretty much redesigned the approach, and we said, okay, we get out, we can recreate all the pieces of a trade transaction, but we're going to do it online, and we're going to have the buyer and the seller be directly in communication. So, and we allowed the buyer and the seller to determine at what point they really needed the funding along the supply chain. So in essence, and we do it, by the way, without any security. So we do not request a UCC filing, no liens, and we do not take title over the goods. And we do it as well for services, which no one in the industry does at the moment. So,
But you're relying then on the buyer's
absolutely
creditworthiness and in order to underwrite the process.
Absolutely, we do. So we look at it this way: if you've managed your company well, we are going to reward you for that. And the way we will reward you is we trust you as a client. You've done business with this supplier probably for 12 years. So we enable you now to have this direct relationship whereby the funding and the financing is really taken out of your decision-making process. So it streamlines it in the way that makes the most business sense and allows you to grow.
So can you give I know the process. Some people out there don't. But can you give an example that might help explain it a little bit clearer?
Well, I can give you one example. For example, we had a client who was buying electronic parts for their manufacturing facility out of China. In this particular case, the Chinese supplier also required a deposit of approximately 50%. Normally, the buyer would have to come up with that 50% and pay for it, and then pay for the rest once the goods came on shore. In this particular case, they could place a basically online for the purchase order. We do not say at what point you can accept. You can accept goods in raw form or at any stage that makes sense for you.
So on that part, the agreement between buyer and seller, you're not interfering with.
No.
They set the terms of when they are going to exchange ownership and when they're going to get paid and all of that kind of thing.
That's the commercial aspect of the transaction is left to the two parties completely on their own. We do not get involved with any kind of dispute or commercial aspect. We really just help them facilitate online. They can make it as paperless as they want. They can upload documents if they so choose, but we really leave those decisions up to the parties involved. So in this particular case, we were able to basically fund for that deposit, and the buyer chose to repay us in 90 days. And so that gave it time for this electronic part to be manufactured in China and send it to the U.S., and they had the part and could place it with their buyer prior to having to pay us on that deposit, as an example.
Yeah.
And then the other 50% was then up for 120 days, and they could wait for full payment.
So,
from their
but
buyer.
it helps their working capital. They're able to pay the supplier up front if need be, and not have to pay you until they start selling and getting receivables in from selling the product and or services they're providing their customers.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
They can wait.
Another question I do have, and because we're almost out of time. If you were giving advice and you're in a startup situation, 2.5 years, excuse me, what would be one piece of advice someone like you is interested in a startup that you would give them?
Mm-hmm. I would actually probably have two.
Okay,
yeah.
please.
One is I would say have a kitchen cabinet. So in other words, your closest associates or friends, and have them, support you while you are deciding on your product or service, etc., because they will be a great sounding board. And the second advice I would have is don't plan just for when you're the startup and you start, but plan for growth, because your main issue is going to be when you are successful and you need working capital to continue.
Now, how can listeners who are interested in your services reach you?
They can go to TradeRiverUSA.com. They can reach us that way, or they can give us a call at 443-759-7119. And the companies that we provide service to are for sales of $2 million to $50 million.
Well, Lila, thank you very much for being here. When we come back from the commercial break, I will be talking to Raquel Schutt of Wedding Savvy. Later in the show, I'll have the AHA Business Trivia Contest. I'm Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio, 1300 AM.
Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating AHA moments for business, by business, and about business. Once again, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Welcome back to the show. My guest this segment is Raquel Schutt, President and Founder of Wedding Savvy. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. The first question I ask every guest is, what motivates you to get up in the morning and go to work?
Gosh, I really love what I do. I really do. I love making people's lives better. I love being a part of such a special day. I love the challenge of planning events, and I love working with my team. It's just every day is new. Every day there's something new that I'm trying to tackle, and I just really enjoy it.
So how'd you get started doing this?
Funny you should ask. So I actually used to work at a downtown hotel as a wedding coordinator, and I had the opportunity to work with some outside private planners, and I just thought there was a need for someone who was a little bit more savvy or a little bit more in tune with clients' desires. I was working on my MBA at Loyola, so I decided to put together a business plan, put my business together. It was well received by clients and customers, and we've been in business for over 16 years now.
So what is it you know, for those who excuse me, put my teeth back in. For those of you out there who don't know what a wedding planner does, what do you do?
That's a great question. Well, we don't just plan weddings. We do all kinds of parties and events. But nowadays, people are so busy with their lives and their jobs, and it's hard to take on that second job of planning a wedding. And that's what a wedding consultant will do for you, is really akin to a realtor would help you buy a house. A wedding coordinator helps you navigate the process of planning a wedding, and is also there on the wedding day so you can relax and enjoy it.
So what are some of the things that you have to do to make it happen?
Oh, boy. Well, we have all kinds of clients. We have clients that we work with from start to finish, and then clients that we just come in the very end to review their details and be with them on the actual wedding day. It's really all about surrounding yourself with the right people, starting with your wedding coordinator. You want to have proven professionals that are really great at what they do. And in our business, we've had the pleasure to work with a wide variety of vendors, and I can meet with a client and say, all right, I think that these 3 vendors would be a great choice for you. Narrowing that process down. And the DMV area, I mean, there's a bazillion photographers alone. We can make that process a little easier.
So if I were on the other side looking to have someone to plan an event or a wedding for me, what are the kinds of questions I should be asking someone like you to figure out if you're the right one for me?
That's a great question, because I believe in this industry, there's really no licensing or certification for you to be an event planner. Well, there are some higher level, but as a wedding coordinator, there's not. So, the very first thing you want to ask, how long have they been doing this? What type of events have they planned? How many people were involved in those events? What were the budgets involved in those events? What was the outcome? Do you have positive reviews? And references. It's such a lost art to ask for. Can I have a few names of people that I can speak to? And then pick up the phone and call them. See what they have to say about this person. And then if you already have a venue selected, pick up the phone and call the venue. Say, have you worked with so-and-so? What has been your experience? So it's really just kind of the old school groundwork of making sure you know who you're working with. So
tell me a story about one of the successful events and really the process you went through in order to help, I don't know whether it's the parents of the bride or the groom or the bride and groom, but go through a scenario of one of the events that you might have planned, so people understand really what goes into it. Having had 2 weddings for 2 daughters, and
intimately,
yes,
the feeling of being the FOB, that's father of the bride.
Right. I've been called a lot worse.
I set you up for that one.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. And probably most of all by my children, but that's beside the point.
Well, let me save you. So stories that people like to hear are kind of, how wedding coordinators, the situations you've gotten yourself into and how to save the day. So some of my biggest challenges always come with the weather. I remember one wedding, there was a hurricane that was coming and it actually closed or the Eastern Shore of Maryland was evacuated. So if you had your wedding scheduled on a venue at the Eastern Shore of Annapolis, you were not having it that weekend. So we did have 2 clients that had to reschedule their wedding. One chose for the following weekend, and then the other chose for 6 months away from that date. So, personal choice. But in Annapolis, they did not evacuate. So we were able to host the wedding. And I got the call from the band about the week before the wedding, and the band leader or the booking company said, I'm really concerned about my employees, and I just don't think that they're going to be able to show up. And I said, well, Kent Island has been evacuated. Annapolis has not been evacuated. I'm showing up. All of the banquet staff is showing up. So, and the hurricane wasn't, I think, going to hit until like 9 or 10 o'clock later on the evening. So long story short, I had to kind of talk this band leader off the cliff. And Mom and Dad had no idea any of this went on. The wedding went off without a hitch. But it's like Dad would have had to get that call. Dad would have had to deal with that if there wasn't a planner.
In my case, all I did was write the checks.
That's very, very typical.
Yes. But it reminds me of that kind of story. My nephew was supposed to get married at, this is a number of years ago, at the B&O Museum. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, there was a storm came through and took the roof off.
Oh, yes.
And that was 3 weeks before the wedding.
Oh, my gosh.
So I don't know if they did it or who did it, but someone found him a venue in 3 weeks.
Wow.
So it went off at 18, I think it was the 1840s Ballroom, yes, is where they eventually got married.
Yes.
But they only had 2 or 3 weeks to let everybody know and change the location. But those things happen.
Exactly, especially being in a military town. In Annapolis, a lot of couples will have to reschedule their wedding. I'm working with a couple for this December. They were supposed to get married last December, but he was deployed. So they had to reschedule everything they chose to wait a whole year. But that's what we do. We make things happen. Well, that's actually a company mantra. It's called make stuff happen.
So if you were giving advice to some other business owner who wants to go into business, you took the flyer 16 years ago to go in business on your own. What would you advise someone to do?
I think there's so many entrepreneurs this day, which is wonderful that so many people have a passion and they want to do it as a business. So I always used to tell people, start small, finish big. I read Fred DeLuca's book about Subway, about how he started as a little sub shop and grew it to a national franchise. So you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be absolutely every detail figured out when you start. Just kind of start something and grow on it and build on it. So that would be my first bit of advice. And then, the second bit of advice is you got to keep hustling. You got to keep grinding. Don't be afraid to try new things. I know these sound like old cliches, but I've lived them, and I'm happy to say that I lived to tell that.
Well, I've lived some of it too. And the word you use that I use so often is about a passion.
Yes.
If you really don't, and I use this blurb, a 30-second presentation on Steve Jobs sitting with Bill Gates on some kind, I don't even know where it was, and he was asked, what are the 2 most important things a startup business should have? And he says the owner must have a passion.
Agreed.
Must have a passion for what because when you get the difficult times and the hard times,
exactly,
you got to be able to get through them because you have a passion and a dream to do it.
Exactly. And it also helps you innovate. If you're truly passionate about what you do, you're always thinking about what's next. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about being a business owner.
And the other thing that you raise, which I talk with my clients all the time, is the only person that never made a mistake is a person that never did anything.
That's exactly right.
So yes, go out there. We all learn more by the mistakes we make.
Exactly.
Than making sure we do it right.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate those comments. So how can listeners who are interested in your services reach you?
Well, our webpage is a great place to start. It's www.weddingsavvyinc.com, and that's wedding with savvy, 2 V's, inc.com. And we're based in Annapolis. We also have an office in North Carolina. That would be, we're on Instagram at Wedding Savvy Inc. We're on Facebook. We're on Snapchat. We're on Twitter as Savvy Raquel. And you can go on our webpage and find all those links.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Later in the show, I have the AHA Business Trivia Contest. And as we go to the commercial break, we have the last traffic update of the day. And I come back, I will be talking to Shoshana Schomburg, owner of Abilities OT Services and Erland Diagnostic Center. I'm Allan Hirsh, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio, 1300 AM.
Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating aha moments for business, by business, and about business. Once again, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Well, welcome back to the show. My guest this segment is Shoshana Schomburg. She's the owner of Abilities OT Services and Erland Diagnostic Center. So, Shoshana, the first question I ask every guest is what motivates you to get up in the morning and go to work?
I think my work. My work is so exciting because I see results and I help people with their learning, working productivity, and their wellness. And because I can see the results pretty quickly, it's very inspiring.
So how did you get started in this?
Well, about 26 years ago, I became an occupational therapist, and I immediately went into private practice. And my whole focus is on wellness and keeping healthy and aging gracefully and productively and independently. I'm, like you, probably a product of the baby boomers, and we are fiercely independent people, and we want to take charge of our lives. And so my goal was to help people to help themselves and not be the medical professional who takes care of you.
So how do you do that?
Well, I research and train in modalities that support people with very little time, very little expense, and almost no equipment. And that they can do at home, they can do with their family members. And so they're self-help techniques as well as technologies that decrease stress. So basically, I'm a stress management coach.
Well, you do parts of your business. And I want to talk because the Abilities OT Services, which is how you got us started originally, correct?
Yes, I got started in building construction, as a matter of fact, and working on accessibility and aging in place.
So can you talk a little bit about what's so important about those kinds of situations with the with the law for disabilities, disability access, all those kinds of things that you were heavily involved in, and you still do some of that as well.
Oh, for sure.
So explain some of that for the listeners.
Okay, in 1990, we have a law called the Americans with Disabilities Act, which gave civil rights to people with disabilities for the first time in our history. And it was a model for the whole world because we actually created laws on how to make environments barrier-free for people with visual impairments, hearing impairments, mobility impairments, wheelchair access, as well as now what I'm doing is working with sensory issues such as autism, chronic migraines, and learning issues. So we're eliminating barriers that keep people stuck in disabling situations, and it can be physical and it can be sensory, and it can be biological as well. But often our environments are more disabling than a disability. And if we can't get out the door, function in our own environments, in a work environment, in a school environment, then we're limited needlessly by the environment and not by our physical and mental abilities. So that was my goal. In the beginning, I worked with seniors because I worked in nursing homes and in community-based services and home care. And I saw that people were limited by the dangers and the barriers in their homes and in their communities. So I became an advocate and also a building professional, because I owned a building contracting company that specialized in the area of removing those barriers. The next level is I work part-time as a therapist for the public school system in pediatrics. And I saw that in those environments, kids were not getting the resources that they needed to maximize their learning abilities. So I started researching many different techniques. And because I worked for Baltimore City and I didn't have a budget, I had to find things that I could implement without having to buy equipment. And that was very exciting because I saw the results for 26 years. And the other half of me was always kept the private practice. So I worked in pediatrics, geriatrics, but really it was always focused on eliminating stress and maximizing function.
So that led you, before I just remind everybody, if they have any questions for Shoshana or me, give us a call, 410-481-1300. So that really led, I guess, you can explain it to me, how you got into what you call the Erlin Diagnostic Center.
So as I actually became a person with a disability about 10 years ago. I got Lyme disease. And for about 2.5 years, I was severely disabled and could not work and could not function. The medical system failed me. I went from doctor to doctor, from intervention to intervention, and I had to find something to do because I could no longer work as a traditional occupational therapist, and that's the profession I absolutely passionately loved. So I tried to find something that was low stress. I didn't have a lot of commitment because I didn't know what my status was from week to week. So I found Erlin method and trained in that method, and it's a sensory processing. Erlin syndrome is a sensory processing disorder. It's found in about 20% of all people, but especially in learning disabled, people with autism, people with chronic migraines and traumatic brain injury, that could be over 70%. And it has to do with light and how light affects the nervous system and the brain, and how that affects the entire body, emotional balance, and mental abilities. So I got into it because I only saw the clients once or twice, and I got results. And it was exciting, and it got me out of my depression and my funk, and I started going out of the house again because it didn't take a lot of physical effort for me I could sit at a table, I didn't have to get on the floor, didn't have to use a therapy ball. And it just turned into such an exciting part of my profession that I really have not gone back to the traditional OT area.
Although you still lecture on or talk about that at some point, don't you?
I lecture on all these different stress management techniques, and they are not necessarily totally exclusive of occupational therapy, but I brought them into the occupational therapy field.
So tell me a little bit more about the Erlin Diagnostic Center. If I'm not mistaken, October is Erlin
Awareness Month, but this week is International Erlin Syndrome Awareness Week. It's being observed in 108 countries by diagnosticians like myself, as well as screeners, and anybody with a bachelor's degree could be trained as a screener. I do offer training programs, and find people who they can help. The first level of Erlin is education. It's knowing where those stressors are, how you determine which ones are your stressors, and how to minimize them. The second level is what we call a screening, and we screen out people we can't help. So really, my success rate is very high because by the time people come for just one more session, which is a 3-hour session for diagnostics, they're people that I can almost for sure help. And you get results, and they can wear these special glasses, and they're made there's only 2 labs in the world, one in Australia and one in Long Beach, California. And it's got tons of evidence-based research, medical as well as educational.
So give me an example of the successes that you've had, or a couple examples of successes you've had with this Erlin diagnostic.
Okay. On my website, I have many testimonials, but I have hundreds of testimonials over the last 8 years of doing the diagnostics. And one that I just got was a parent of 2 kids with autism, and they had years of occupational therapy, vision therapy, special ed resources, reading resource room, medications, and then they came to me in their teenage years about 3 years ago, and the mother just wrote this beautiful testimonial about how her kids, this was the thing that was never addressed. She said every parent should know about this, every teacher, every therapist, every pediatrician, because her kids could have been helped in first grade. They went through years of disabling and expensive treatments that were minimally effective. Once they got their lenses, and these are special lenses, they're not optical lenses, they catapulted in their handwriting, in their reading, in their feelings of well-being, and they're doing great. And one child with autism is now in college, and he never had social relationships. Now he has social relationships because he's feeling more calm and connected to himself and feeling more confident. There's many other stories. Migraines.
I was just going to ask, besides the autism and helping those with autism, what are some of the other symptoms or illnesses or stress points that you see from some of the people you work with that you've been able to help, so that listeners out there have some understanding of what can be done that traditional doctors and pharmacists out there aren't doing?
Well, most people that I see have either been misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. And it's a sensory issue. It has to do with how light is processed in the brain and the occipital cortex and how that creates stress in the whole body. So I work very heavily with dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, traumatic brain injury, and chronic migraines and headaches. Half of my clients are chronic migraine sufferers who have been on a myriad of a journey through intervention and drugs, and many of them have been addicted to drugs and had to get off of those drugs, and then they couldn't get help for their migraines. And when they wear these lenses, if they test positive, and we, as I said, if there's somebody I can't help, we'll know in one session, and they can either minimize or eliminate migraines without drugs. So what I do is drug-free, it's immediate, it's simple, it's low cost, and it's worth trying before other things, because you could spend years looking at other things and spending fortunes.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time to discuss it further.
Thank you.
But how can the listeners, if they're interested in reaching out to you, get in touch with you?
Well, you can go to my Facebook page, Abilities OT Services and Erland Diagnostic Center, or my website has a lot of research and videos and testimonials and also forms, testing.
So what's the website?
It's www.aotss.com. And you can also sign up for my newsletter and also contact me through the website.
Okay. Again, thank you for being here. When we come back, I will have the AHA Business Trivia Contest. The winner will receive 2 movie passes and a gift certificate to the Cine Bistro at the Rotunda. And I'll be talking to Durwood Witten, Ph.D. and President of Complete Wellness. I'm Allan Hirsh, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio, 1300 AM.
Here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Well, welcome back. The trivia question tonight is, who is the only president of the United States with a Ph.D.? The caller tonight at 410-481-1300 with the correct answer will receive 2 movie passes and a gift certificate to the Cine Bistro at the Rotunda. Again, who is the only president of the United States with a Ph.D.? That's 410-481-1300. In this segment, I have in the studio with me Durwood Witten, Ph.D. and President of Complete Wellness. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here, Allan.
It's my pleasure to have you. So the first question I ask every guest is, what motivates you to get up in the morning and go to work?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. In my kind of work, and one of the things I do is I'm a clinical psychologist. And one of the things that motivates me is the ability to work with people who need what I can do. To be able to help people in this world is probably, for me, the most important thing that I can imagine. So just the ability to be able to offer a service, and maybe at the end of the day, somebody's life is improved because of the work that we do.
And one of the line, and I know you a little bit, and I know that's important to you, and I'm a firm believer that when you improve one person's life, you improve their entire world. So it's not just improving their life.
That's exactly right. And in sometimes helping people recognize what it is about their world, can stand improvement. because I firmly believe that environment is a big component of people's well-being and their wellness in general.
So tell me a little bit about your wellness center, Complete Wellness.
So Complete Wellness is, at its core, a mental health center. We treat a variety of issues around mental health disorders and mental distress, but I believe that we take this on in a somewhat unconventional way. While we do have conventional medication management and we do have psychotherapy, we also have a relationship with acupuncturist. We have a nutritionist on staff. So one of the things that I think we're really good at is we're good at matching the needs of the individual against those things that are going to improve the quality of their life, regardless of what diagnosis they may come to us with.
So how did you get started? Because I know you had a career before you got into this. So how did you get started and transform? And I hope with what you're doing, sounds like you would really enjoy and have a passion for it. How did you go from where you were to where you are today with the Wellness Center?
Yeah, I was a software engineer for 20 years. And the short version of that story is I just got bored. After a while, I felt like all the exciting technology problems had been solved, which of course isn't really true. And as a technology person, I was okay at it. And I kind of decided that because I was making other companies wealthy, was the world really a better place? And whether it was or it wasn't, I felt like I needed to make or have a bigger impact in the world, maybe at a different kind of level. And so I took a graduate level psychology course and loved it. And so then I took another one. And next thing you know, I had a master's degree. And then I decided, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. So I decided to get a doctorate, spend a whole lot of money and a whole lot of time in graduate school, and ended up in a lot of really exciting places. I've had some amazing clinical training and clinical experiences. I've worked on an Army base, seeing soldiers coming back from war. I've worked in prison, both men and women's prisons, helping people kind of deal with circumstances that they have. And at the end of it, this is really kind of what has kind of propelled me into where I am now, because it felt right. People seemed to respond to the work that I did. And so what I have now is a clinic that I've helped create that addresses mental health issues in the way that I think is important.
So what makes your mental health, let me ask it this way. Mm-hmm. What is so important that you see that yours is different than makes your Complete Wellness Centers, because I believe you have 2 locations in Baltimore, and where you can answer this at the end, where they are. But what makes so important to you that it is different?
Well, I'm not going to say that other mental health clinics are not good.
I didn't ask that question. What makes it different?
But one of the things that we really focus on is, what do you as an individual have to say about your situation? And I think what we do is we look at the whole person. We just don't look at one part or try to change one part. We actually treat you like a whole person, that you have some kind of say-so in how you want to be treated and how you want your treatment to progress. And so we are happy to partner and work with any other clinician you have. If you have a medical doctor that you're working with, we are happy to partner with them so that we can collaborate to give you the best kind of treatment experience that you can get. And so I would say that one of the primary things that makes us different is the level of collaboration that we have between the clinicians in our office, because you may see more than one, or clinicians outside of our office. We work really hard to provide you a complete and whole experience.
Okay. Before I ask the next question, I want to remind the audience that love to have a caller or two to answer the question, who is the only president of the United States with a PhD? And I thought of this because Dr. Whitten is here. He's, I think, might be the only PhD I've ever had on the show, but that's why I picked the question. But anyway, so you have 2 locations. Where are they?
Right. Our home office is in Mount Vernon, really close to the Washington Monument. In fact, we're almost right across the street from the School of the Arts. And then we have another office that's in downtown, right on Baltimore Street. And so either office is convenient. There are some services we offer at one place that we don't offer in the other. For example, our Mount Vernon office is where our psychological testing center are. And we get a lot of referrals from, in fact, other clinicians who are trying to figure out exactly maybe what's going on. Some cases are harder to diagnose. Well, that's one of the things that we're really good at. And in fact, most of what we do is attention deficit assessment to find out whether your problem with attention is neurological or more emotional. And then our downtown office is where we house our nutrition center. And we actually have a substance abuse group that meets down there as well.
So if you were giving, you're an entrepreneur. You started this, how long ago did you start the clinic?
5 years.
So with 5 years experience, if you were talking to a group of other entrepreneurs or people that want to be entrepreneurs, what would be a couple pieces of advice you would give them before they went into business?
I think that from my own experience, what I've learned is to pick a thing and master that. A lot of us that I think are business owners are really good at a few things and may be tempted to take on a bunch of things at one time and try to grow a business with a bunch of things. But I think in our case, we learned that it's just to take one thing, like maybe our substance abuse program, and really bring that and create a good program with solid credentials and a solid team, and then go on and build the next thing. So I would say don't spread yourself too thin at the beginning. And
create, in some words, create a niche that you're an expert in before you go to the next niche.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay.
I think that, I really appreciate specialization and even in mental health, there are different specialties in that. But I would say if you're going to have, in our case, like a psychotherapy practice, make sure you have a really good, strong, robust psychotherapy practice before you expand it.
Okay. So again, got 1 minute before we wrap up. If anybody knows the answer to the question, who's the only president of the United States with a PhD, quickly call 410-481-1300. Otherwise, in another minute or so, I'll give the answer. I won't be using it, but I'll give away the gift certificate and the tickets next week. So how can the listeners, if they want to talk to you or reach out to you, how can they get to you?
There's a couple of different ways. One is our website, which is www.completew.com. Or you can call our office at 443-438-7863. So those are the two simplest ways probably. And if you call that phone number, my extension is 102. You can leave a message if I'm in session, and I'll get right back to you.
So is there one other quick thing with the next 15, 30 seconds that you'd like to leave with the listeners? If not, I'll take care of it. And that's by answer. Anything?
Nothing off the top of my head.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. And please, those out there that want to reach out to them, please do. Do we have a caller coming in, Joe? Quickly, before I wrap up? No. Okay. Well, thank you for being here, Joe. Joe, thank you for everything you do as the producer, Joe LaCroix. I want to thank also my videographer who is videotaping tonight's show, Larry Wilner of LW BizFlix. Please join me next Tuesday at 6 p.m. when my guest will be Randall Nixon, the governor's special business ombudsman. So we'll talk about a lot about government and business. For those who didn't call in, the answer to the trivia question is the only president of the United States with a PhD was Dr. Woodrow Wilson. So that's the answer. You can also follow me or be in touch with me actually on my website, which is allanhirshadvisors.com, or you can reach me at 443-977-4500. You can also listen to the podcast of all the past shows on the show's website, which is www.ahabizradio.com. You can also follow and see the videos on my YouTube station. Again, AHA Biz Radio is the YouTube channel. And follow me on Twitter and Facebook as well. Also want to thank all 4 guests for being here tonight and for their openness about their business. And this has been AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio 1300 AM.